There we go. And we're rolling. Welcome to episode 45 of the Orchestra podcast. Cannot believe we made it this far. There's still a couple that I've got to edit and get out there into the world. Took a brief hiatus around Christmas time. But we are circling back to some repeat offenders. And we have with us today Dr. Ryan Dudenbostel from Western Washington University. He is here with us today, as with my previous guest, Dr. Jeffrey Bill Hansen, to just kind of talk about what the past year has looked like in academia, in the university realm, and what the future looks like for him, and for any students out there to maybe hear some of the awesome things that are still happening at universities, and definitely I know I've heard some really good news out of Western lately for ways that they are hoping to keep students and staff safe and also return to a little bit of normalcy. But please do introduce yourself, Dr. Dudenbostel, for those of us who maybe didn't see the first episode.
Well, thank you, Nathan, so much for having me. Yeah, my name is Ryan Dudenbostel. I'm the Director of Orchestral Studies here at Western Washington University. This is my 7th year of teaching here. And yeah, it's been quite a ride, as it has been for everybody. So when last we spoke, last spring, everything was virtual completely. No one was seeing anybody. And we were able to open up a little bit in the fall. Singing and wind playing was still completely online and still is. Well, that's not true. That's not true. Until just very recently, the last couple of weeks has been totally online. But we have been able to have string playing and piano and percussion in person. So anybody who can play masked has been able to come in person, provided that they're tested every 2 weeks and that they're appropriately social distanced and our meetings are not very long. So we have 2 orchestras at Western. We have a full symphony orchestra normally that meets 3 days a week and does concerts twice per term. And it's busy and rigorous. So we've kind of stripped that down to being mostly a string orchestra. We've done some stuff with percussion and harp and keyboards. And then we have our string sinfonia, which is mostly for non-majors. It's a smaller string orchestra. And that group has kind of been unscathed, with the exception that our rehearsals are shorter. We usually meet for 4 hours a week. Now we're meeting for 2. But other than that, it's been mostly normal. We have had to be spaced at 8 feet apart, which has been just fascinating in terms of how like the behavioral psychology of string players, who, as you know, love to be in huddled masses and really feel each other and hear each other. And so at this distance, they feel like they're playing way louder than everybody else and they can't hear anybody and they only hear themselves. So it's really taken, I would say, until this spring to convince them that, yes, the sound is blending. It doesn't sound like it to you, but if you play full and confidently, the composite result of this in the hall is really, really beautiful. And we've been talking about creating like a bubble around yourself of in excess of 4 feet of sound, so that it touches somebody else's bubble. And if we make big enough bubbles, then we can hear each other and we feel connected. So that has been a big project that I had not expected. That's been very interesting to negotiate. And I expect, because they've now done it for so long, that when we come back to normal-ish situation in the fall, they'll be much stronger for it.
Well, we were talking, sorry to interrupt. Right before we hit record, we were talking about, I have some concerts coming up. But the big blue beast, as you've called it, and I love that term, I'm going to keep using it, is even with all of the kiddos who chose not to participate this year, which every program is dealing with. It's not, I think we all have to just not take offense to it and just realize there are a lot of kids who are in music to play with their friends, or just to literally play music in a live in-person setting. And when that option wasn't available, they themselves were not available. And that's just what it was. And I think we would all do well to not take it personally. And hopefully we can recoup some of those. And I know your colleague and my predecessor, Dr. A, would say, if they don't choose to come back when it is available, then they were never really meant to be with you in the first place,
Hmm.
which is a hard pill to swallow.
It
Uh,
is, right.
but
Yeah,
the kids who we have left, Bob Phillips says, teach the child in front of you, well-known teacher and composer.
of course.
And even if it's just one student or if it's the big blue beast of 118 that we're used to, you teach the child in front of you one at a time and each in their own unique way. But as I've been getting ready for these concerts, which we have to do split in half, so I made the kids sort of choose. Students have a lot going on, despite the fact that there is a slightly ongoing pandemic. Um, they still seem to be busy somehow. Of which day can you be there, the 25th or the 26th, and then sort of let kids self-select so that they're playing with the people they want to play with,
Sure.
as we were just discussing. That's so important. But in class, they're split in half again. And that wasn't really their choice per se. So a lot of kids don't have that friend or the kid who maybe started before fourth grade on their own, uh, that they rely upon to play louder with, and they're spaced out a little bit farther. As the school day goes on, the interpretation of 6 feet becomes a little more interesting.
Right.
I'm not in a space where it would be really easy to, um, mark off with tape where the chair goes and nail it down,
Sure.
so that the chairs tend to float. Um, but that's beside the point. What you're saying about the confidence of string players, I could have told you that they have no self confidence whatsoever. I mean, if ever once you have made the mistake of asking one string player to play by themselves, who is not the concertmaster or principal, you're not going to get a big, loud, full sound.
Right.
But since I started teaching 7 years ago, my mantra has been proud and loud or strong and wrong. One one or the other, hopefully both.
Yeah.
Proud and loud, strong and wrong. Because as educators, if we hear a wrong note, we can fix it, typically, or at least we know that something is going wrong that needs to be addressed. If we can't hear it, then we don't even know what to work with. It's like a painter showing up and the benefactor has provided the canvas, but no pigments of any kind to paint with, is what
Right.
it feels like when our students don't play out with a big full sound or any sound. And our first day back with humans in the room back in February was with my eighth graders. And these are kids that I saw for the first time in person February 3rd or something like that.
Yeah.
And I saw one of their concerts when they were seventh graders. Um, but despite this being, I mean, almost my third year in Port Angeles, a lot of these kids I'd never even met before.
Hmm.
And typically we do the all city strings thing at the
Right.
end of the year in Port Angeles, and they know who I am, and I like would have worked with them since they were fourth graders. Uh, Met them for the first time in the middle of the school year. And normally middle school kids are a little bit more rambunctious
Sure.
and talkative. And I knew I was in for an interesting end of the year when I heard how quiet it was. Not before they had even unpacked their instruments, they wouldn't even talk to each other. And I think that has something to do with the whole camera off, microphone off. I'm not talking, I'm not turning my camera on. And as much as I would encourage the students to at least unmute their microphone, there is something psychological about that. Everybody, even, I mean, in staff meetings, I'm sure you've been in staff meetings where even adults are doing the same thing. And I
Hmm.
think we've gotten in this habit now of, I don't have to be heard and I don't want to be heard. And then not getting in practice of exercising your voice, you kind
Right.
of lose it. It's like
Yeah,
use it or lose
absolutely.
it.
No, I mean,
Uh,
after more than a year of this, it's going to take a while for us to come back to it, and like for kids to learn how to talk to each other and screw
and
around in
it's the
class again.
same way with sound, with our instruments.
Hmm.
Is we've got the kids back,
Yeah.
and everybody was saying, even kids on the fence of do I stay in orchestra or not, or do I continue with my music degree or not? uh, and we're here being encouraging because that's our job. Of yes, stay in. I will do my very best to give you a meaningful experience. No, it will not be the same. But now we have opportunities to play together, and certainly next year in the fall, and we can talk about what that's going to look like in a moment. Uh, but students still feeling this sense of insecurity. What do we tell these students? So you can come back in person, you can play with your friends, but they're still insecure. What do we do with them?
You're asking me this question?
Yeah.
I think you first you name, just from my experience here, you name that it's hard and that we're all feeling this way. Like
Hmm.
you say, like I'm feeling insecure. I haven't maybe you say like I haven't conducted in a year, um, and we're gonna figure this out, and it's gonna be rocky, but we're together, and we
Hmm.
can support each other, and even those who are strong and more confident, they need the support of those who are less confident. So if you're feeling
Yeah.
less confident, you still owe it to your colleagues
Hmm.
to try and be big, and think about, these circumstances are still not normal, but they are a great training opportunity. So this is like boot camp, and I keep telling my orchestras here, this is like boot camp, and when we're back together
Hmm.
and you're close, it's going to feel so great, and you're all going to be so much stronger for it.
Hmm.
Um, so that I think that's how I would approach it, is like not saying like, okay, we're back to normal now, let's be normal. Like, no, we're
Hmm.
now in training, we're in recovery, we're in rehab. This is
Hmm.
orchestra rehab, and we're all here to support each other and help each other get back on our feet. And then
What's
sort of set the finish line is next fall, which hopefully will be much more close to what we're used to, or what we'd like to see.
an example that I was reflecting on when I was thinking about, I mean, and this is really kind of a teaching practice that I have always had, based on what I experienced as a student. Is in the Tacoma Youth Symphony, we were all kind of, um, go home and practice for 2 hours kind of kids.
Sure.
And so we didn't need the support of anybody, and you could put anything on the stand, and we would, at least fake it. Uh, and certainly, I think we played Petrushka and Shasti Five on the same concert once, and I know for at least 5 weeks we were faking it. Uh, but I also participated in the student orchestras of Greater Olympia,
Mhm.
and they have teaching artists who are adults that the sectional coaches
Sure.
sit in each rehearsal with the students.
Hmm.
And the first couple of rehearsals, you know, there were a couple of times where you heard a lot of the coaches more so than the students, or at least in a pronounced way. But as you approached the concert, it was the students, fully and completely, and the coaches were kind of there, um, not like uh, bumper bowling, but almost. If there was like bumper bowling where the rim was just a couple strips of tape that sort of like would maybe divert a terrible disaster.
Sure. Sure.
Uh, and so when I began teaching, certainly with beginners, you play the piano with them.
Yeah.
I mean, all the way through, training wheels firmly on.
Hmm.
But with junior high and not so much with high school students, but every now and again, with my junior high students, I would play. I had an electric violin hooked up to the sound system. And
Cool.
so I could hop around on any part, and no matter how loud they were, because teaching in Puyallup before I came to Port Angeles, uh, I was not so lucky to have multiple sections of orchestra. I would have the one room of 100 kids with just myself, and it was, wow, you're doing terrific work. You have 100 kids in a classroom, uh, but no, you cannot have another section. Uh, and now we're dealing with the reverse of that, but the kids still need the support.
Yeah.
I had one of my colleagues come and observe me a couple of days ago, and I sort of switched between conducting and playing with the this a fifth period 8A doesn't have a viola player in it. So, okay, well, first violins need a little bit of support. I'll play with them here. Oh, here's this important viola part. I'll play that so that uh, the experience of rehearsal is as complete as if we were the big blue beast. I think
Sure.
that's important.
Yeah.
And after I was done with that class period, my colleague asked me, "Why do you play with the kids?" It's like, well, can you imagine? Like, I, I'm not going to let them sit there and suffer silently alone, unsupported, just me waving a stick. And this is realistically, they haven't practiced in a year.
Right.
Uh, like, let's just assume nobody's practiced.
Hmm.
You'll like yourself a whole lot better if you just assume that nobody practices. And then we can do all the work to get them to practice, but just assume that they won't.
Hmm.
It's better off. Um, but it doesn't do them any good to make them feel bad about the way that they sound.
Right.
And one of my first podcasts that I did, it was like episode 15 or 16 with Dr. Quinton Morris. He asked me, what's the number one reason that students quit as beginners? And his answer was that they don't love their sound.
Hmm. Yeah.
And we're in a pretty fragile state as a music community right now. If the students don't love their sound, I mean, they've got reason A through triple Q to quit right now.
Right.
So they need to love their sound. And if I play with them, then they hear me 3 times as much as they hear themselves. And hopefully I'm playing the right note in tune with the right rhythm. I mean, I'm not perfect, uh, but we can get through a piece without stopping if I do the junior high method with the high schoolers. And it's not, the full English, junior high method. It's I'm playing the bars that I know they feel insecure about, and then I'm conducting the part that I know they can play. And as our concert approaches, the training wheels are coming off, and I'm doing less and less playing because that's what they need to feel secure again. And then when we have our concert, they're going to have all their buddies, and yes, they're going to be spaced apart, but they're in spaced apart in class. But I will be allowed to have up to 50 students on stage,
Great.
and I can have some audience, but nobody from two separate households can sit next to each other,
Uh-huh.
and all of those kinds of rules.
Yeah. That's
Um,
wonderful that you get to have an audience. That makes such a difference. Yeah.
but what's missing for me is uh, it is always my belief that your uh, least experienced group should be on the concert with your most experienced group. They
Mhm.
should see where they're going
Absolutely.
and see that in 2 years' time, if I do what I'm supposed to be doing, if I just meet minimum expectations, that's where I'm going to be. And because of all of the restrictions, and we need to leave time for the room to air out, we can't. No two groups can perform together. So we have 2 concert nights, but nobody's playing back to back.
Okay.
So the ninth graders will play, and then there will be half hour of air cleansing,
Mhm.
and then the next group will come on stage. And that's kind of a bummer to me.
Yeah.
So I'm hoping some students will choose to participate as audience, because at least for the Port Angeles kids, and this was something that Dr. James Ray pointed out to me, specific to the Port Angeles kids, is they will make you believe that they cannot play the concert until the downbeat of the concert. They will hold out on you until the last possible minute. And so I've got a good sense now that the concert's actually probably, hopefully, going to be pretty good.
Uh-huh.
I mean, we've worked really, really hard with all of the circumstances to put something together that's representative of certainly my seniors, all of the work that they put in for all of the opportunities that have been denied to them. Uh, and I know how much better they play when they have an audience of people they respect. And who do they respect more than their peers?
Right.
I mean, their parents, they would almost prefer their parents didn't come.
Uh-huh.
but but their peers, I'm hoping will choose to come and be audience during the concerts that they don't have to play in. Um, but anyhow, I've been talking this whole time and not interviewing my guest. So tell us about. I've got a good question. I gave a little private lesson with one of your students in the non-audition string orchestra,
Oh yeah.
and you were working on the Akutagawa. Is that suite or serenade? And
15.
the triptych.
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
student taught with Paula Ferguson
Oh
at
right.
Redmond High School,
And
and
that's where I learned that
where we
piece.
met.
Mhm.
Yes, and then they won state with that piece. I think right after that, and it wasn't a piece I had ever heard of before, and it took me a good 10 minutes to remember what on earth do I know this piece from, and why is it so cool?
Yeah. Oh, it's
Uh,
amazing.
but then I was blown away that you would put something so cool like that in front of that particular ensemble. Not that it's too hard, because I looked at the score and it's actually much simpler than I thought it was. The
Yeah.
solos are kind of difficult. You have to have people ready to play the solos,
Hmm.
and some of the rhythms are tricky. But it's very homogenous. I mean, the everybody kind of plays the same melody, same rhythm at the
Hmm.
same time when
Absolutely.
it
It's
gets
repetitive
interesting.
enough. It's repetitive enough that you get one section and the rest kind of plugs in. Yeah.
But repertoire is something that has been fresh on my mind with the serving on the NAFME National Orchestra Council,
Sure.
of trying to diversify the repertoire, and if we can, convince some of our publishing friends that we need a new set of not just pedagogic repertoire, but repertoire for students that is relevant.
Yeah.
Because I think even those of you in academia could do with some less technically difficult pieces
Mhm.
that are still representative of hard work uh, and and showcase what the students can do at a high level, but aren't so terrifying that a student is like, I don't want to do orchestra.
Yeah.
Because you get kids all the time who were my students in Port Angeles, who are bio majors at Western or sociology majors, who should be playing in your orchestra.
Yes.
But if the audition is the last page of Check Five, they're going to feel unwelcome.
Right.
So how do you approach this new repertoire conundrum and some of the emerging issues with repertoire?
Yeah. Oh my gosh, so many things to unpack there. Before I do that, I want to go back to something you were talking about before with like dealing with kids now, and
Mm-hmm.
you don't want to lose a kid because they don't like their sound. I think, and you described this as a fragile time. I think you're absolutely right. And what the students need most of all now is to have a joyful experience with music, and whatever it takes to make it joyful. This is not the time to crack the whip, because we're not
No.
recording for Deutsche Grammophon this year. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
we're just coming back together and remembering how special it is to have music. Um, so I just wanted to put that out there, and it seems like we're totally on the same page in terms of
Well,
that.
if you're even in Texas, a high school orchestra teacher, you think you're going to make the definitive recording of the Tchaikovsky Serenade? Get over
Right?
yourself.
Yeah.
Like, you
Yeah.
need a reality check and then come back to work.
Yeah. So you're asking this question about repertoire, and you mentioned hard auditions, and that's something
Mm-hmm.
we're taking a look at this year as well. That we make sure that the audition material doesn't scare away anybody, and that
Mm-hmm.
we have kind of a tiered audition system for those students who are maybe performance majors and need practice on having a hack at Ein Heldenleben,
Mm.
at They need to learn those excerpts if they want to do it. So why
Mhm.
not? Why not have that available to them? But most of our students can't even approach that yet. Maybe they will someday, but not now. And so making sure that they don't feel like, well, that's what I have to even, I don't even know where to start with an excerpt like that. Making sure that they feel like there is a way that they can represent themselves at their best in the audition, so they're not intimidated out of it. But you're asking about repertoire. One thing that I think about a lot is that my students are grown-ups. Even those in the non-audition group, they're adults legally. So even though they're not, they're playing, um, it, the level of their playing limits them in terms of
Mhm.
a lot of the repertoire. And you mentioned some of this repertoire by BIPOC composers is often really hard because it's new.
Mhm. Yeah.
Um, it's not all really hard. So, and there are pieces, wonderful pieces out there that are playable. Adolphus Hailstork has some terrific pieces that are totally
Mhm.
doable by a high school group. There's some wonderful music by William Grant Still that
Mm.
is very doable.
Mhm.
I'm actually doing two pieces by him this quarter, just coincidentally. The Sinfonia, the non-audition or the campus group is playing a piece for strings, piano, and harp called Inanga. And the harp part is very difficult, but the string parts are not. And it's wonderful. It's so great. And then the
Mhm.
symphony is playing a shorter piece called Mother and Child, a slow piece that's an
Mhm.
arrangement that he made of a violin and piano piece that's just gorgeous. And
Uh-huh.
it's only available by rental, but it's very inexpensive.
Mhm.
I think we paid less than $200 to rent it. So there are those pieces, but it takes a lot of looking, a
Well,
lot
that
of
the
study.
rental thing it creates this whole access problem
It does.
that the NAFME Council sat down with some publishers and some composers, and we just kind of said, how can we get your music in front of our students? And I think
Mhm.
a lot of the composers just don't understand how much budget we have available.
Right.
But we have this mutual understanding that absolutely you deserve to be paid for your work. I mean, you are a composer doing work that needs to be done so that we can achieve our goals. I mean, first and foremost, teaching students how to play music and love music. And, if we can get some representation in there as well, that is really one of our bigger goals above, our just day-to-day primary goals. Um, and we talked about like consortia projects and other things, but what it all came down to is that the world of music is small, but you only know the people you know.
Right.
And a lot of us need to draw a circle that's a little bit bigger,
Mhm.
because if something doesn't exist, you can make it.
Right.
You just have to ask the right people, and maybe you have to ask 3 or 4 people to get to the solution. I served as an adjudicator just a couple of weeks ago for Quentin Morris's Key to Change Solo Strings Festival, and many of the students that were his private students were playing the set of pieces written by a man named Caleb Bon Jones,
Okay.
because they had determined there's nothing wrong with Suzuki. The approach is great, but lightly row is maybe not the most relevant music for kids from Renton and SeaTac.
Yeah.
That's probably not what they need in front of them. And so he found a composer who is an African American man to write. I think he finished 5, working on 10 solo pieces that work for violin or viola, and they're brilliant. You
Cool.
wouldn't know for a second that they were, modern per se, because you pointed out a problem. Like the George Walker lyric suite for strings is beautiful. It's amazing, but
But it's an F
eighth
sharp.
graders are not going to be able to play that music. It's not
Yeah.
approachable.
Right.
And
And it's the
if we
easiest one of his pieces. If you've looked at
and
his
it's
other scores,
yeah,
they're really hard.
and so looking into next year, I was thinking, as a white teacher in a very white neighborhood, uh, if I don't bring the diversity in, if I don't import it, they're not going to get any of it. And so I've reached out to Caleb Von Jones with Monique Mead, who is a professor at Carnegie Mellon, but runs this little strings festival here in Port Angeles. And we went in halvesies on a commission. And I was just very specific about the reality of my program. But you can do like, let's do about a grade 3 for everybody, but give me like grade 5 solos for each instrument, because that we can achieve that.
Sure.
And then I'll leave it up to you what you want to make the content about, or the style. You're the composer. That's, we are looking for something to finish out the program, and that's up to you to do your job with. But if it doesn't exist, we can create it. And I think that's a mindset shift that those of us in the classical world need to do. And this makes me think of our last conversation. You were talking about putting things in corners. You do the children's concert and you put the movie music in the corner, you put the children's concert in the corner, and the children don't come to the Tchaikovsky, and Star Wars doesn't come to the concert hall in a respectable, serious way. And as you think about that on a deeper level with diversity, you put the Black composers on the Black composer concert. Well, that's putting it on the shelf. It's putting it in a box. It's isolating it. And yes, and I think is the motto moving forward. Yes, Beethoven 5 and Caleb Von Jones. Yes, Tchaikovsky 4 and George Walker. Yes, Mahler 2. Well, it may be nothing else. That's probably all you could do on that concert.
Mahler 4, and then
and Mahler 4 and something else that is representative of contemporary music and contemporary musicians. I mean, all of this music coming out of Jesse Montgomery lately that is very doable at a college level. I mean, definitely more difficult, but she's a living, breathing human being. You could say, hey, we have this budget to spend. What can we get? And maybe she'll say a 3-minute festival overture. Maybe she'll say, I kind of like your message and what you're trying to do. I'll give you a symphony, or maybe just a rhapsody. But if you don't reach out as that conductor,
then you don't get anything.
You get nothing. But we can make the concerts that we need. We can make the repertoire that suits our classrooms. Don't just I would, for anybody, all the teachers watching out there, don't look at your out of date library on the shelf and just say, this is what I have to play because this is what I have.
Oh yeah,
there's absolutely. A whole community of people, even if it's I loan you the music just out of my own goodwill for something that I think is more appropriate. That's that school orchestra and string teachers Facebook group is like the font of knowledge for me when I have a question. For college orchestra directors, Coda seems to be an awesome resource.
Incredible.
I love connecting with Dr. Thomas Taylor Dickey. Is somebody who's very active in Coda and promoting alternative pathways to the podium, and he's arranged a couple of these Florence Price pieces. I just think there's no excuse anymore to not move forward. Right. So tell us about when next fall hits. What does it look like for you and your students?
Yeah, well, we'll start kind of institutionally and then go down to the artistic level. So Western 2 weeks ago announced that they'll require vaccinations for everybody, which we kind of knew was coming down the pipe, but they were waiting, I think, until another school made that call. So that's really changed a lot of things. Most of our classes are going to be in person without social distancing on a fairly normal schedule. We're doing some things a little bit differently in the music department. We're performing ensembles always in our biggest spaces with some ventilation, just to err on the side of caution. But on the whole, we're pretty much back in action. So this time a year ago, we had just canceled our concerto competition. We have a student concerto competition every year, like most universities do. So we did that again. We did it this March with all these hoops to jump through, but we still had it. It was a live event, and our judges were watching via live stream, and they deliberated on Zoom. So we have 3 winners from that, and we also have a new composition competition. So those winners who won this spring will perform in November. Typically, they would compete in March, play in June. But now we held the thing in April, and then they'll perform in November for an audience with full orchestra. So we have a brand new piece, and then 3 student soloists on their pieces, and it's kind of a big like welcome back party.
Well, I kind of like that better anyway, because in previous models, it's you audition in October and perform in the spring.
Uh-huh.
But if you were a freshman or a transferring sophomore, you haven't even been with that teacher for 5 weeks, and you're
Right.
supposed to audition at the highest possible conceivable level.
Mm-hmm.
The performing in the fall actually makes a little bit more sense to me.
Yeah, it's
Of
tricky for
the
students who are graduating
Yeah,
to bring them back, if they go to grad school or something. So I think what we'll do next year is we'll
mhm.
have the competition in mid-March like we always do, and then they'll perform in June. So they do have the most of the year to prepare. So we'll have 2 concerto competition concerts bookending the season, and I'm just so excited about that. And I think like a lot of groups, so many things that were in motion were shut down suddenly. There's like a latent buildup of projects that now are suddenly starting to move again. We were supposed to go to Prague and Vienna last June, and that
Oh
obviously
boy.
was canceled. Yeah, and that was like 3 years of fundraising. It was a big deal. And the travel agency went bankrupt because they lost all their flights were canceled and everything. It's a huge recovery to bring all that back. But that's in the cards. Probably in 2 or 3 years, we'll do something like that. We were supposed to give. We're not calling it the American premiere. We're calling it the American preview performance of a new work by John Williams for piano and orchestra with Gloria Chang, who's a Grammy-winning pianist from LA. That was supposed to happen last spring, no, it's supposed to happen like right now, and it's going to happen next spring because the official world or American premiere of this piece has also been postponed. So she's coming here to Western to do kind of an out-of-town tryout of this piece. So our audience will be the first Americans to hear this music, but we're not calling it the American premiere. It's a test run, which is a wonderful position that universities are in. That I think you talk about, making a new situation. A lot of my colleagues, I don't think about this, that we're sort of in the spectrum of high and low pressure situations. We're a pretty low pressure situation for a high level performer who's working on a new piece to kind of test it, do a run with an orchestra that can play it, but where the consequences of it not going so well potentially are not devastating.
Well, and that's something you get out of these, sort of brainless self-help books, of focus on the solution, not on the problem.
Yeah.
And I think for all of us, it's really easy to focus on, wow, times are really fragile right now, or geez, I lost a lot of students this year, or what are the fourth graders going to even be able to do? Will I have any fifth graders when the fall hits? Or universities worried about how are we going to keep everybody employed?
Yeah.
If we instead look at the diverse solutions, and diverse in the sense of many options, I think that's actually kind of exciting. Of how do we find a path forward? How do we create a new path forward?
Yeah.
I forget which childhood story it was, but can't go around it, can't go over it. You've just got to go through it. You
Right.
have to, forge your own path right now,
Yes.
whether you're me at the high school or you at the university. And I think that's exciting.
I
Uh,
think it is too. And I think it's really important in these times and as we come out of them to do as much stuff as publicly as possible. So to maintain focus and attention if resources, I shouldn't even say when, if resources are scarce, it's always the squeaky wheel that is taken care of, right? So that's been a major priority of mine this year. So we've been very fortunate to have string orchestras in rehearsal live, and we've had events every quarter. In the fall I was on family leave. I had a baby born, my second, in October, so I had a replacement in, and they gave what essentially was like a normal concert but without audience, and it was live streamed. And the performance was really good. Students really brought it, but the absence of the audience was very felt. And it made me just really kind of step back and see what an active role the audience plays in framing the ritual of performance. So then when we came back in the winter, we decided to do something different, like make kind of like a TV special out of each of our programs. And so we video recorded everything over several days, which was a really interesting experience in and of itself. And then edited that together. So like a movement on each day, and really like tried to do it right and carefully, so that the result was probably better than what their live performance would be, because we had multiple takes and could kind of rehearse along the way. And then the students separately filmed themselves talking about this movement or this composer or whatever, and then we edited it all together. So it was kind of going back and forth between performance and talking. And that's something that we normally couldn't do in a live situation. To have like a violist come out of the orchestra and then give a big presentation about a movement and then come back in and play. That's a hard thing to do.
Well, and that you're kind of I think this is what you're getting at, and it's something that I'm realizing I had kind of been failing to do, because the natural function of my orchestra does this inherently, but visibility.
Yes.
Of being visible. And as I reflect, like in Port Angeles, anybody not from Port Angeles knows the big thing going on in town is the school music program.
Right.
But everybody in Port Angeles, of what's important to you, what's exciting in Port Angeles, maybe they say the select softball team or school sports. And there's nothing wrong with athletics. I think those are powerful motivators for a lot of students. But when everyone external from our community knows that we have this big, huge music program and it's a big deal and it does great things for kids, but they go to our school district website and they see all of the pictures that they see in the district website are like a football kid wearing a mask tackling another kid from another school from another town who is maybe not wearing his mask correctly. I think that presents a really weird image of, hey, we're getting taxpayer dollars to teach students. And athletics are, as important as they are, they're extra. And right. According to the Every Student Succeeds Act, music is curricular. Mm-hmm. The taxpayers locally are giving us money to educate children, and music is one of the courses we offer. We've got to be really careful about what message we're sending. And this isn't unique to Port Angeles. This is everywhere. Sure. But running that kind of concert where you're really putting each individual string player in front of the camera to talk about, I think that visibility of what we teach students, and maybe just having more performances more frequently, because we're recording all the time, we're making little vignettes that we could just, even though maybe we only did one day of recording, maybe we drop them on the weekly basis. Yeah. Maybe I, in my small town, put a quartet on the street corner every, Tuesday from 5 to 6. That visibility will be a way of re-earning the trust of our communities and convincing prospective students, for me, fourth graders, for you, high schoolers and transfer students, that when they search anything about Port Angeles or they search anything about Western, the first thing they see, because we've just produced so much content, is the orchestra program. Right. And that visibility issue is something that orchestra people traditionally don't prioritize. It's like, well, we're the only ones doing Tchaikovsky. If you want to get to Tchaikovsky, you come to us. Yeah. But what are we doing for the people who don't know Tchaikovsky?
That's
what are we doing for the people who don't feel comfortable, don't feel safe, if that's all that's offered?
Mm-hmm. That's right. And that goes back to the thing you were talking about with, stepping into your orchestra library and saying like, well, this is what I have, so this is what I have to play. Like, no, we got to work harder. We have to work harder to do things that are different and that draw in a broader range of people. And that means are the people who are playing and the people who are coming to hear it. I just think it's really important to just work a little harder, and don't be afraid if something's difficult. It probably means it's worth doing, right? And you can.
Yeah,
One
and
thing
that
I've learned from this job, and I'm very lucky in this institution where I can work pretty autonomously. If I'm willing to put in the work, I can do basically anything I want. There's not someone who's going to do it for me. But if I can do it, if I'm willing to stay up all night and edit a video, I get to make a video. That kind of thing. There's no barrier. So I think that's really true for everybody. That if you have an idea and you're willing to do it, very rarely is anyone going to say no. You just have to do it yourself.
Well, yeah, as even in public schools, as the music teacher, so long as you're not, going against any kind of directives on behavior or, staff protocol, administrators for the most part don't understand what you do. And if the kids are happy and the parents are happy, you can do whatever crazy project you want to.
Right.
I mean, there are lines you must stay within, but if you don't make too much noise doing whatever it is you're doing, and what the administrator sees or what the board of trustees, the college sees, is a huge group of excited students that are performing at a high level, then squeaky wheel gets the grease.
Yeah.
I think the misinterpretation there is that if the squeaky wheel is just complaining all the time of, oh, you don't give me enough funding and you're not helping me, that squeaky wheel gets replaced.
Right. Yeah. It's not about complaint. It's about, like you say, visibility, presence. That it becomes a natural, assumed part of the ecosystem. This program. It's that everybody knows that it's there, and look, they're doing all this stuff, and we can't lose this.
Well,
How active they are.
We're coming up on an hour now, and I don't want to keep you too long. But as you're looking at repertoire for next year, I wonder if you might talk for a little bit about how, in the wake of this powerful movement following the murder of George Floyd and an almost resurgence of the civil rights movement in our country and in music, and also in mind that we are coming out of a pandemic, hopefully, knock on wood, coming out of a pandemic, at least in the States, in Washington anyway. How do you approach repertoire for next year for your students? And what do you have in the works that you might be willing to share?
Sure. We've had a year of conversations as a department about structural inequities in our music curriculum, which, college music curriculums by and large are very conservative and haven't, with the exception of some schools, haven't dramatically changed in probably like 75 years. The 2 years of music theory, and this is what you learn in music theory, and the augmented sixth chords and all that stuff. So we're really starting to look at making some kind of foundational changes, which is a very slow and necessarily slow process. And also talking about programming, and you mentioned putting things in corners. One thing I've been very deliberate about this past year, and then will continue to be, is to not do that. Is to have a broad representation that is fully integrated throughout the season. And that's we might have an opener by a Japanese composer. We might have an entree by an African American composer. I'm talking about length of pieces, like an anchor piece. One of the pieces for next year is the William Dawson Negro Folk Symphony, which I'd meant to do this, or I had intended to do this past year, but had to postpone. We're also doing some fabulous songs by an Nigerian-American composer, Nkiru Okoye, from her Harriet Tubman opera. There's 4 arias for soprano from that. We're playing a newish piece by a young kind of crossover jazz classical composer named Courtney Bryan called Shedding Skin. And then there's also standard rep, because that stuff is there too, right? So you can't abandon that. The students need to have experience playing that. There's a lot of value to be drawn from it. It's wonderful. They need to have these pieces under their belts. So we're playing the Enigma variations by Elgar. That's kind of the big reach piece. We often have one piece for the symphony during the year that we rehearse across a number of quarters. Like I'll give it to them at the end of fall, and then we kind of touch on it now and again in the winter, and then kind of build hardcore into it in the spring. So those are some of the big things. And then, we have the concerto competition winners and the composition competition winners. And so there's always a kind of a wild card in with that. So those are some of the things. I have other things in the hopper too, but I'm not willing to say them yet, because I don't want to get held down to them. But I think trying to change my own perspective, that there's a bucket of canonical works, your Beethoven symphonies and Brahms overtures and all that, and then there's like the diversity pieces, which even I'll just have to confess, like a couple of years ago, I would have that would have been an honest description of how I thought about things. Like, here are the canonical pieces, and I have to plug in these other things. But I'm really trying to change the way I think about this as it's just all music. And I want to make sure that what we have programmed looks like our students, or better yet, looks like how we would want our students to look. Looks more diverse than our student body, and that a prospective student from any background, or a prospective audience member from any background would say, like, oh, I connect with that. Oh, I get that. Like, I don't know this one, but that makes a lot of sense to me.
Well, I love the yes and model, because I think at one point in a student's college career, they should probably play a Beethoven symphony.
Absolutely. I mean, yes.
Don't throw the Beethoven out with the bathwater.
Right.
You can have your cake and eat it too, but also not putting anything in a corner. And you have to put on a concert that students want to play and the audience wants to hear. Right. You have to do those things. And if we want to talk about, well, I kind of like to do corners, how can I make that work? I think the way you make corners work is that you've got a corner for everything. You sort of do pictures at an exhibition. Our fall concert is celebrating Asian composers. Our winter concert is celebrating Latin American composers. And then you touch on everything. But the idea of yes and, I think is a little more effective and will last a longer term of just putting good music on the stand. When the NAFME Council was meeting with these composers, we were talking about if J.W. Pepper was willing to install a search filter for BIPOC composer, would you be willing to self-identify as a BIPOC composer? And a couple of them said no, because I want to be a composer. Right. I didn't choose to be born Black. I chose to be a composer. And that is how I want to be received in the professional community. And I hadn't even thought about that. That hit me in the head like a bucket full of bricks. And it really changed my perspective. And if we do the corners concert, then I think that's what we're doing to that person's reputation when their music stands on their own 2 feet. And so I suppose one of my last 2 questions here has got to be, how do we, especially those of us in academia, go about selecting music that stands on its own 2 feet, that doesn't put anybody in a corner, and maybe doesn't include, Beethoven on every concert? How do we cultivate a catalog of repertoire for our libraries?
Well, I think first you have to listen a lot, and find one thing that I do is I find maybe another orchestra that I really like, really admire. This helps me a lot with the string orchestra programming. a group like a Far Cry, and I see, well,
Yeah.
what are they playing? Because they played all kinds of music and it's really interesting. Or I find a composer of a piece that I really like, and I say, well, what other composers are being programmed on concerts with them? And you can sort of connect one dot to the next, and then you sort of build an idea of what's out there, both composers and their pieces. And then I kind of have like a list, a running list of these are pieces that I like, that I'm really engaged with, that I think are really cool. And I think that's something that's really important as an artist. If you don't believe in a piece, that doesn't mean the piece is bad, but it means it's not the piece for you. And you have to, as a leader, artistic leader, you got to be convinced that the piece resonates with you if you're going to teach it, I think. I have a list of these things and how long they are and what they're for and how hard they are. And then I just kind of move them around and experiment with different meals. I think a lot in terms of food, just because I'm hungry all the time. But what would make an interesting menu of pieces that's approachable, that fits all these different categories, that it's not too hard, and we can put it together in 5 weeks or whatever. And then I try to think more broadly too, that I have my students for 4 years, most of them. So if we don't get a Beethoven symphony this year, it's okay. It's okay. We can do it another year. And I don't feel the pressure that maybe I felt when I started this job. Like I have to do all these things in 1 year. I don't. It's a bigger picture that I'm creating. But it starts, I think, from just exploring a ton of music, and finding like what do you like, what's interesting to you, and then who is working with the people that you like, or what other pieces are being programmed with them. Because as I'm sure you and everybody listening has discovered, like learning about new pieces, it's overwhelming.
Well, and sometimes you need to force yourself to listen to music that you don't like.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
Because I think there are a lot of people who are adverse to new music. But I think I could talk about this from the other angle of, I don't see a lot of value in the symphonies of Brahms and Schumann. I think there are so many other things that fill that void or achieve those goals that say exactly what they say more uniquely, a way that's more approachable, a way that the audience will enjoy better. Because Brahms said exactly what Beethoven had to say with a more diverse harmonic texture, and he took so much longer to say it. So Brahms is great. It's beautiful. Music theorists love Brahms. Not a ton of melodies in Brahms symphonies that audience are going to, I mean, you put Brahms 4 in the program, the scherzo is going to be the most melodic thing there, and it's really not all that melodic, although it is very technically interesting and very technically difficult for the violins. Do you want to spend all of your technical expenditure on Brahms 4 for that school year? And then Schumann, same story. It's just Beethoven plus Schubert, Schumann. I think you'd be better off doing Schubert 9, which isn't done enough, and spend the rest of your year doing things that are not programmed ever. Because if you want to hear Brahms 4 and Schumann 1, go buy a CD, is my advice.
Sure, yeah.
So
yeah, I mean, there's a pedagogical value of having your students have gone through those pieces, some of those pieces.
Well, exactly, is I had to force myself to re-listen to Schumann and Brahms. And why are the music theorists so in love with Brahms? And why do so many of the old school people love Schumann? And I think I've started to get it. I think it has something to do with them being pianists. But finding the value it's not just, composer is more than just one work. And a concert is more than just one piece. And if you've done all of the Beethoven, like in the 4-year cycle recently, and you have a senior who has spent the last 3 years doing Beethoven, and they're going to do another Beethoven on every concert the rest for their senior year, the last year they're spending with you. If you need something that is shaped like Beethoven, but maybe has a slightly different flavor, is maybe a little more modern, a little more romantic, that's where the Brahms and the Schumann comes in. Or maybe you're a Brahmsaholic and you need to fill a Brahms-shaped hole. that is less demanding of your students, I highly recommend the Eroica Symphony.
Yeah,
And so that's the angle that I've had to look at it. But making myself appreciate what I avoid, and why do other people like these things?
Yeah. Right.
So I guess that's the point that I took 5 ever to get to.
Sure. So it's like, well, I'll probably never conduct Bruckner.
Yeah, I mean, he said so
because
little, so much.
I totally respect it, and I think it's monumental, incredible music, but it doesn't align with my heart. So I'm not the right person for that. And there, like to your point, I can teach a lot of the techniques and the values of that kind of music through other pieces. I happen to adore Brahms and am endlessly fascinated by Brahms's music, and I just find it to be so incredibly perfect. But that's me and that's you. So I'll do the Brahms, and you don't have to.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Yeah. And then there are also, there are shorter pieces, like the Brahms Academic Festival Orchestra or Overture has all of Brahms's tricks in it.
Oh, yeah.
10 minutes. And so you all the rhythmic tricks and all the harmonic shifts, all of his favorite tools.
And it's easier than the Tragic Overture.
Yeah, and it's
the
really
Tragic
fun.
Overture is very, very difficult, but the Academic Festival Overture is very approachable. But it's still, like you say, 110% complete Brahms.
Absolutely, yeah. And then the Haydn variations, same thing, delightful piece.
Oh yes, I think if I had to pick a favorite Brahms, it would be the Haydn variations for sure.
Yeah.
Or, well, I think if I was picking favorite Brahms, I would go into chamber music, because I think that's really where he excelled as a composer. That's a totally different conversation.
Right.
But for those of us who are adverse to new music, new composers, open up a Spotify playlist, open up a Pandora station, and search for Jesse Montgomery, or maybe something that's modern, but maybe not, too fresh. I mean, even William Grant Still or George Walker. I mean, he's got some stuff that's pretty out there. If you want to keep it palatable, there are people writing this music. You just gotta maybe force yourself to go outside of the comfort zone, and if you can't yourself drink the Kool-Aid, at least have a taste and figure out what is it that other people like about this.
Right.
Because there are reasons.
And I would say that the music written in the last 20 years is by and large more approachable than the music written in the 20 years prior to that. It's kind of shifted back, and I think a lot more, I don't want to say popular, but, and I don't want to say palatable either, because I think all music can be palatable if you've cultivated your tastes. But more immediately approachable.
I think when you listen to film scores, I think neo-romantic, I think, is the era we're kind of in now, with what sells at the concert hall, what audiences are willing to come and hear. Some of these Hans Zimmer scores, where you sort of have like the Debussy moving seascapes, chordal palettes, but then with melodies that are very consonant, very straightforward. Right. But definitely more percussion. I mean, or those of us in the orchestra world, look at the symphonic winds or the wind ensembles, especially those out of Northwestern and UNT. Just give me 1 second.
No problem. I should get off the call pretty soon. Anyway.
Okay, so I just wrapped it up. We're talking about expanding our horizons, but let's put a cap on this conversation here. We've been going for long enough here. We're looking at an exciting future of returning back to school, both you and I, full time, with people back in person. Unless something terrible happens. But I think we do need to appreciate and respect the frailty of our relationship with our community and our students. And I think it sounds like Western is doing everything they can to respect where students are at right now.
I think so.
Which is really, that's from the perspective, like somebody who doesn't like Brahms, of trying to understand why so many people do like Brahms. I need to understand. if I'm an administrator, I need to understand what are students upset about. Why aren't the students turning their cameras on? Instead of just demanding turn your cameras on, we've got to leave the comfort zone and see things from the opposite perspective. But I'll ask you, in my first interview with any guest, my question is, if you could go back in time and give yourself some advice. My question the second time around with guests is, if you could go back to the beginning of this school year and change your approach at all, how would you have done things differently this school year?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, two things. I'm an endless optimist, and so I had like our fall COVID plan, and then we're going to be back to normal in winter, and then we changed the winter plan, but we're going to be back to normal in spring. Oh, let's change the spring plan. I think I would have had either no plan or a much more conservative plan, and then build on that rather than having a kind of adventurous plan and then have to scale that back. So I think no plan probably wouldn't work for me, but I think I would have taken a more pessimistic is too dark a word, pragmatic approach maybe, and kind of assumed that things would take longer to get better than shorter. Um, and one of the blessings of this year, and there are silver linings to everything, is that it's with so many opportunities limited, it just gives more space, more mental space for
Mhm.
things, and things are kind of slower. So I've really been focused more in my teaching on reinforcing fundamentals and really demanding, like, we have to make this phrase, like, you have to crescendo through this long note to earn the short notes that come next, and really insisting upon it every time, stopping, no, at the frog, no, at the tip, you must use the full bow. We're not all doing vibrato, come on. And really being so precise about these things in a way that maybe during a busier season, it's like, we just got to get this, we got to get this thing on its feet. Um, I think that's going to continue over in my teaching. I'm planning next year. We have some exciting things in the works, but I'm definitely not over programming, because there's going to be a lot of rebuilding, particularly with the winds and brass, and
Mhm.
just making sure that everybody is supported and has the tools to be successful. And we're really focusing on fundamentals. So that's one thing. And then another thing that I've been experimenting with this year, just trying to be very mindful of, is going into rehearsals without bias about what I'm going to hear. And what I
Mhm.
mean is not thinking like, okay, well, the viol is always rush here, so I need to put my attention on that. Or this is going to be a spot where the violins are going to be crazy out of tune, so that's probably going to be
Mhm.
something I hear. Because then my bias is confirmed or not confirmed. And then I think, oh, they're in tune. Great, this is good. But I'm not really hearing like, well, maybe there's another problem that I hadn't anticipated. So I'm really trying to be very disciplined about going into every rehearsal with a vivid picture of the music in my mind. Like, what does it sound like perfectly when it's my version of perfect, and then just hearing what's happening, and then just reconciling the two without any kind of assumption about how it's going to go. And that has been really
Mm.
eye opening, and it's I don't know, it's allowed me to go into rehearsals in a way that's more calm, because I don't have a problem that I'm preparing to solve. It's kind of like, when you're going to have a difficult conversation with somebody, and you play all the games in your head of like, well, I'm going to say this, but what if they say this? Then I'll say this, and and you kind of get yourself keyed up. It's a small version of that. Like, okay, I've got an hour and a half, and I've got all these problems to solve. How am I going to do it? I don't know. And then I come in, and I'm already kind of in that state. But I'm really trying to come in and say, like, all right, well, we're working on the first movement of the atoms today. Let's begin, and then let's see how it's going, and then we can really sort of meet it fresh. And I like myself as a conductor more this quarter, when I think about that. Like, I think about, like, oh, I really liked how I was today, and I really heard things, and I really was helpful today. I want to do more of this. So that would, I guess, be the thing that I would have told myself a year ago. Is you start doing this now, being
As
just
someone
a little more
who's
careful.
been a student more recently, uh, myself, and as somebody who plays in a lot of community orchestras, seeing both of those directors, I've survived a couple of conductor searches as a musician, and the conductor who comes in with his sticky notes of, I'm going to start at three after A because I know the violins are going to be out of tune, and I'm going to start right at the third movement, and I'm going to tell the oboe player that I'd like them to do the solo slower right out of the gate. And then you have the person who just, well, it's the first rehearsal. We don't know what's going to happen.
Mhm.
Let's just play through. If we get in the weeds, let's break it apart. Let's isolate, integrate, and get through it. Because the musicians have come to play and play with each other, which in the fall, I think will be the biggest deal, is the making music with each other. And if us as, teacher conductor is too hung up in, I've got to fix beat 3 of measure 58, then that's time spent people not making music with each other.
Right.
And maybe that is something that we should have been doing all along,
Yeah.
was just letting our musicians play. Yes, have high standards. Yes,
Oh,
fix
absolutely.
measure 58.
Right.
You're not going to let
Yeah.
the wrong notes slide.
Yeah.
But at those really important, like, first rehearsals or the dress rehearsal, of just allowing the natural flow to take place, and to see the orchestra as an organism, not as your army of followers, it is such a powerful shift as a teacher or a conductor. That's great advice. Thank you so much.
Oh yeah. Well, and I would say they're playing better. They're playing better because I'm hearing better. And I'm noticing things and really fine detailed things that I normally wouldn't when I was focused more on problem solving. The different problems are revealing themselves, and so I think we're all happier for it. And of course, there is a time for the sticky notes, right? If you're in a dress rehearsal and before you run through the piece, like these 4 transitions did not go well last time. Let's go over these first, and then we'll run the piece. Like, I think, right? It's not like always like let's play, but I think on the whole, just coming in and just seeing what's going on today is a little bit.
And don't waste your whole class period working with just the cellos.
Right.
Have them come early. Have them stay after. Send the brass home and work with the strings. I think we need to be sensitive to the fragility of our situation, and I think it will make us better musicians, and it will help our ensembles enjoy making music again. It will, in the in-person sense, they'll be turning their cameras on,
right?
Because they feel safe with us. They are not concerned that measure 58 is going to get torn to shreds. They just know we're going to play the music.
Right. And then if they're happy, they'll play better. Right. And that's the whole.
If they're happy, they'll play better. Maybe that's going to be the title of this episode. I always have a fun time.
Yeah.
I love when the title of the movie is in the movie.
Right.
And so I always try to take something from the podcast that becomes the title.
Yeah.
If they're joyful. Last episode was "It's All Candy" was the title of the last episode.
That's right. Yeah.
Well, anyhow, Dr. Dudenbostel, thank you so much for joining us on the Orchestra podcast again. I was saying before we started, I think this will become an annual tradition now, because it's almost been a year since we spoke. I cannot believe how fast this year has gone, and the end of the school year, I don't know how it's been going for you, but it's been crescendo molto al fine for me. And I don't expect that will change at any point in my career.
Yeah, nor should it. Yeah.
Nor should it. Thank you so much. I've got one more question after I stop the recording. But thank you on behalf of all of my guests and my students. We appreciate what you're doing, where you are, and what you're doing to raise those of us lowly high school teachers one rung up the ladder.
Well, hardly. I wouldn't last a day in your job. But thank you so much for having me. And it's always a delight to talk to you. So,
all right.
Looking forward to the next time we see each
Ryan.
other, not on Zoom. Bye-bye.